U.S. President Donald Trump escalated his tariff threat today.
Tariffs on Canada and Mexico, 25%. That's coming on Saturday?
That's coming on the 1st, Saturday. Those tariffs may or may not rise with time.
No oil tariff, no oil tariffs.
No, I don't. Well, I didn't say that. You said that. No.
Well, I don't want to misinterpret.
No, we may or may not. We're going to make that determination probably tonight on oil. Yeah, because they send us oil. We'll see. It depends on what the price is.
Now, the federal government says it will support Canadian workers and businesses hurt by those tariffs. And today, NDP Leader Jagmeet Singh said his party might help, would help, but on his own terms and his own timeline.
Recall Parliament, put forward protections for workers before Parliament. Let's get the opposition leaders together. Obviously, we need to support that kind of package, and then let's have an election in the spring.
Okay, so where does this leave Canada in its fight against tariffs just 2 days before they are set to hit? Let's bring in the power panel to talk about that. Amanda Alvaro is a former Liberal Party communication strategist. Gary Keller is a former chief of staff to Conservative ministers. Andrew Thompson is a former Saskatchewan NDP finance minister. And Shachi Kurl is the president of the Angus Reid Institute. It is good to see you all. Because news breaks every 2 minutes now, I just want to give you an update on something else we're learning, and that is that the federal government is poised to walk back its changes to the capital gains inclusion rate that was announced in last year's budget, further delaying the implementation of those changes. What a high-level source is telling me is the exact plan hasn't been finalized, but ordering the Canada Revenue Agency not to collect the new taxes, which still haven't officially been approved by Parliament, is a key option on the table. And what that would do is it would essentially push the changes past the date of the likely next federal election and almost certainly spelling the end of this tax change on the inclusion rate for capital gains. That was a core part of Chrystia Freeland's last budget and what she said was a core policy to address fairness for every generation, but which was deeply unpopular, is deeply unpopular with small businesses, doctors, and the tech sector, arguing it made Canada less competitive. And of course, Freeland has now walked away from that, citing the uncertainty from the U.S. As she seeks the Liberal leadership. So I wanted to give you all of that panel because it fits into this conversation. So Amanda, why don't we start with you? A lot of signature Liberal policies kind of getting thrown overboard as they bail water right now. What do you make of this possible development and the latest musings from Trump that tariffs come in at 25% and may or may not go up from there?
So many mixed messages, and it's like a tennis match. You don't know which way to look, right? Because we also heard from Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly today, who said that she felt that the border security plan that she had put in front of the Secretary of State felt like a plan that was there was a lot of reception to it. It felt like there was some progress being made. So it's hard to tell because these messages seem to be flipping one way and then flipping the other way. And I don't think we'll have any clarity, honestly, until the 1st. And that deadline could be fluid as well. We've heard deadlines before. They've come and they've gone. January 20th obviously went. There wasn't an executive order. Now we're looking at the 1st. And you even hear, when he's asked that follow-up question around oil, the president is still sort of like, well, we haven't made that determination yet. That could come later tonight. So you can see that things are still on the table. Yeah. Really what I think that, the Liberals have tried to do over the course of the last couple of weeks is really sell through this $1.3 billion border security plan, sell through its effectiveness, sell through the efficiency of it, the fact that it's ready to go, that it is moving, the RCMP's on board, technology, the drones, helicopters, etc. And I think that sales job has come in from as many points of contact as possible. So, again, we won't know until the 1st, and I think that it won't be until then that we can have a concrete response in terms of what retaliatory measures we would need to take.
Well, Gary, there's February 1st, which Amanda's talking about. Then there's April 1st, which Howard Lutnick was talking about yesterday in his confirmation hearing, saying there's a broader restructuring of manufacturing and trade that they're eyeing, as part of the study that's due on that day. But what's your thoughts on Trump today and the fact that it seems like the capital gains thing is DOA?
Well, let me start with that first. These liberals are trying to memory hole the last 9 years of their policy platform, whether it's the capital gains tax or, Chrystia Freeland says, I'm going to get tough and reduce the size of the prime minister's office. David, she had the largest minister's office in Canadian history, to the point where senior public servants have told me it was an entire disaster trying to get a decision made out of it. And then you have Karina Gould saying, let's reduce the GST to 4%. Well, I feel like Stephen Harper's around, and this is Stephen Harper era politics. So to see Liberals just memory holing their 9 years of policies, I mean, it's quite astounding, the chutzpah here involved. When it comes to the Trump tariffs, yeah, again, mixed messages. I think that, Lutnick's testimony yesterday was, I thought, enlightening and had some interesting points to it. At the same time, we won't know until the final tariff list is published. I've heard that there is, an initial list of 3 or 4 really targeted, as opposed to a blanket situation. We heard him talk about the oil tariffs, and he may make a decision tonight, and he might change it tomorrow. So we just as Canadians have to be prepared to live with it, and in terms of the back and forth, and be prepared for what happens no matter what.
Andrew, I don't know if you raised taxes in any of your budgets, but I don't know if you did it like this,
I did not.
the
My
hokey
budgets all
pokey.
had tax cuts. Thank you very much.
Okay, but as a former finance minister, what do you make of this, right? I mean, they never did get the capital gains inclusion rate passed through the Parliament for a bunch of reasons, but CRA is planning to collect it unless ordered not to, which is one of the options they're looking at now. It's a bizarre way to do policy, but here we are. So your thoughts on this and the bizarre way President Trump is doing policy?
Yeah, I mean, on the capital gains piece, let's remember that this started with a piece of politics where the Liberals thought that they could corner the Conservatives into voting against what they were voting for. I don't know which they were hoping for. On the capital gains, they had pulled it out of the omnibus budget bill, wanted it as a separate piece of legislation, and then, of course, as politics intervenes, things happen, everything falls apart on them, and this never goes forward. The idea that the CRA has been collecting this, though, in the belief that at some point this would be passed, is now no longer really a tenable position for them. And I think that that's what you're starting to see happen, is just reality's catching up. Bad decision on the part of whoever was managing the House at the time in terms of how they thought that strategy was going to work. But it's led us to today, where they're obviously thinking again about just a whole raft of things that are impacting the Canadian economy with the tariffs coming forward. Big question, I think, for Trump, and you see he's really still trying to make his mind up on it, is how much does he think American consumers are prepared to pay for extra goods and services in the United States? And gas is obviously the number one of those. Putting a tariff on will have an immediate impact at the pump. Americans, we know, are highly sensitive to gas prices. I mean, they're fuming right now about the price of eggs because of avian flu and other things.
Yeah.
But the gas piece will really punch him in the gut. And I think Trump's got to decide whether he can effectively, as he tries with everything else, lay the blame somewhere else, or whether he's able to put forward an argument that this is necessary to protect American industry.
Shachi, your thoughts on all of these things?
Well, I have an answer to Andrew's question.
Ah.
62% of Americans who say that they support these tariffs on Canada also say, oh, by the way, if a gallon of my gasoline were to be raised anywhere between 30 and 70 cents a gallon, and that's something that we pulled and cited from CBS News. They were quoting some data around that. When we ask Americans who say they support these tariffs, well, how would you feel about this? 2/3 of them basically say, oh, we'd probably change our mind on these tariffs.
There you go.
And so, I think we all, probably because we try to put bad things out of our minds and forget painful occurrences, may have forgotten some of the lessons learned from the first 4 years of Trump between 2016 and 2017 and 2021, which is he makes decisions based on the last person that he's listened to, and he's highly changeable. So if there comes a point where the American public start to say, hey, exactly what are you doing here? I would not be surprised if we saw a climb down on oil or a pivot on oil. As to the rest of it, as to the border plan, as to who's talking to him and what they're saying and the sales job, I feel for anyone who is trying to put Canada's case, or frankly, any country's case, to the White House at the moment and to Trump. Ultimately, he is the decision maker. We know how chaotic that can be. But my feeling is, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what we do, because the goalpost will change over and over again.
Yeah.
Canadians are fairly bloody minded about wanting to see retaliatory tariffs. They have an appetite for that. They have an appetite for just cutting off. critical exports to the US, such as minerals and oil and gas. Is that going to have a catastrophic impact on our own economy? Yes, but so too with the tariffs. So,
Right.
from a public opinion standpoint, Americans who are aware of these tariffs, and very few of them are, even when we put it to them, only about 1 in 4 wants them. And those are all Trump voters.
Yeah.
And among them, they're quite prepared to change their mind. On the other hand, Canadians are ready to fight. They're angry and they're prepared to say, look, we're going to see our own economic situation very, very badly damaged one way or the other. Might as well go down swinging.
Yeah, and you wonder, Amanda, how Americans can not be aware of this, but Trump is doing so many things so fast. You can understand
Exactly.
how tariff policy, gets lost. But the scenario that he laid out today, that oil may or may not be included, and he's going to make a decision on that tonight. I'm sure that's a great sigh of relief for Daniel Smith, Andrew Furey, and Scott Moe. But boy, if certain core sectors of the Canadian economy are out and certain core sectors of the Canadian economy are in, and they've already struggled to come up with a unified, completely response, and the idea of using export tariffs as a way of hitting back, that is going to be even trickier than it has been to this point if there's a winner and loser in the tariff hit from the U.S.
For sure. And I'm sure that that's been part of the calculation as well on the Trump side, is that, having a united Canada, having everybody arm in arm in terms of retaliatory measures and in terms of how we're addressing this issue makes Canada come from a place of strength. And what they're looking at is for us to come from a place of weakness. So divide and conquer is one way to do that. You saw that when Danielle Smith came back from her time in Mar-a-Lago and she was talking about this potential carve out and the immediate backlash that she received, not just from her own voters, but from the other premiers, particularly from Doug Ford, who really took aim at her for that, to say, we absolutely have to come from a position of strength here. We have to be unified in our messaging. So if they start picking and choosing, which looks like they may do, I think that we're going to have a challenge in how we respond, certainly.
Gary, how do you balance that, right? I mean, because Daniel Smith and others have been clear, don't use energy as a leverage play, and there is some economic analysis that says you'll just make things a whole lot worse for yourself if you do. But if Trump does start dividing it up, what do you do?
Yeah, and of course, that's a reality too. As I was mentioning before, there may be an initial suite of tariffs that target, certain industries as a first round. Again, we'll have to wait and see. But, to be fair to Daniel Smith, all of a sudden it was Doug Ford and some of the premiers who were saying, well, maybe we'll have to, restrict things like oil and gas and energy exports, to which Danielle Smith said, well, wait just a minute here. Have we talked about this? Have we consulted? No, I'm not going to let that happen. I'm going to stand up for not just the Alberta energy industry, but the positive impact on GDP and other economic factors across the country. I mean, think about all the people who travel back and forth for work in Alberta and in the oil sands and the energy sector. I mean, in some ways, this will be good news for one sector. I get that people want a unified approach. If we wanted a unified approach, then we should have had a federal government acting like adults in charge for the last number of months, rather than having to deal with all their internal political machinations.
Right. And look, Andrew, I don't think anybody was keen to use anybody's assets, in a trade war. And Mexico has a stable 6-term president. Well, no, Gary, I see it. Newfoundland and Labrador says we have to keep all options on the table. They go bankrupt if this happens. That is the most financially fragile province in Canada. But, they realize you can't say to the guy trying to bully into submission that we won't hit back as hard as we can, right? So, no one's enthusiastic about this. It sucks. But, Andrew, I mean, what do you make of all of this?
I think what we're getting confused about is the argument that we should have a unified approach, i.e. premiers should come together, Canadians should come together and agree, look, we're going to take this on. We're not exempting out anybody. We're not favoring anybody. But that also doesn't mean that we can't be targeted in our response back. And I think that if we really go to think about it, nobody's suggesting that if Trump doesn't put a 25% tariff on, at least I don't think anybody is, that we should put a 25% export tariff on, to punish them. I mean, there are probably other targeted measures we can use to deal with this. And I think that's what the difference is here. When you get folks like Preston Manning today in the papers, you've got Daniel Smith and others essentially arguing Trump's position, and saying that we should be carving out and some should be held sacrosanct. That's not really what a unified position is about. It's about, look, we all agree that some people are going to hurt. We're going to figure out how to fix that, and we're going to respond in the smartest, most targeted way possible. If it's not across the board, great. Then we've got a whole slew of options that are available as to how Canadians can respond. If it is across the board, then we're in for a lot of hurt, and we're going to have to figure out how we mitigate for that, for those Canadians who are losing their jobs in those industries that are going to be impacted.
Okay, Shachi, I got about 30 seconds. I want to give you the last word before we take a break.
Yeah, well, don't get me started about the conversations around equalization and which provinces believe that they pay more to the system or lift more than their weight, blah, blah. Because those happen to be some of the same provinces that may get lucky on, and it will come down to dumb luck on an oil export. But to Andrew's point, there is if we do see a carve out or an exemption on oil and gas, well, then my presumption will be then how do we ensure that the revenues from those things are distributed in such a way that the sectors that are particularly badly hit and the people working in those sectors, most importantly, are able to access relief. So, okay, if we're going to shoulder levels of pain differently, then there has to be some amount of pain relief paid out from the sectors that will benefit from being exempted.
Yeah, less pain is better than any pain. I think everybody agrees on that. It's just what does that do to the internal political currents that are kind of making this tough?